It's a rainy day in Vlogland. And you know what rainy days mean? Rainy days mean that nobody follows traffic rules. And so in these situations, what I tend to do is every time I try to cross the street and somebody tries not to use the stop sign, I give them a glare that says, "You even touch me with your car and I will claim you broke both of my legs and use all of your insurance money." Making a video. Hello. If you're familiar with the clothing line Out of Print Clothing, they're the people who put book covers on t-shirts. They just released a new line of children's book t-shirts, and I recently bought the Wizard of Oz one. It got me to thinking, when you're a kid, like, things that should scare you don't, and things that really aren't that scary at all do. I found this a lot with some of my childhood books as I was thinking about it, so I'll do that for you now. Number one is the Wizard of Oz. The end of the Wizard of Oz, as everyone knows, it's the same in the book as in the movie, essentially. She comes home after crossing the desert, between Oz and the real world, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I'm home, and no place like home, blah blah blah." I always found that message troubling, like there's no place like home, you should never look farther than your own backyard, like even as a kid, just because I was a big traveler as a kid. If I called my mom up and I said, "I don't want to be at college anymore, there's no place like home, I should never look farther than my own backyard," she would say, "Shut up, I'm paying for your education, if you come home I'll kick you out." I think that's more of a problem I have with the movie, because Dorothy goes on in the Oz series to have many, many adventures in Oz, and this brings me to the third book, which is Ozma of Oz. Ozma, in Ozma of Oz, comes about in the land of Oz after she is transformed from a little boy to Queen Ozma, which should be disturbing enough in itself, but I never read Land of Oz because I just had a boy in it. And I was like, I don't want to read books about boys. There are lots of things that should have scared me about it that really didn't. There are these things called the Wheelers, and like the whole like beginning of the book focuses on like all these things on the ground. It's like, beware of the Wheelers, and then she picks one of their lunch boxes, and then these really frightening things with like scary faces and like wheels for feet like come and attack her, and I was like, oh, it's just some guys with some freaky faces, that's fine. But perhaps the more concerning one is the main antagonist of Ozma of Oz, who is Princess Languidire. She had this little cupboard where she contained all of her, like, I think it was like 28 heads or something, don't quote me on that. Her different heads, like her pretty heads and her ugly heads, like look different obviously, but they also had like different personalities, so like if she picked a bitchy head, she would be a total bitch that day. A big part of the novel focuses on Dorothy going to see her, like asking for help about something. And the princess is like, "You know what, I'm not gonna let you leave until you give me your head, because I like your head. And I think it'd be a perfectly fair exchange if I just give you one of my old heads." Dorothy's of course like, "No." And I was totally unfazed by this. Why are people scared of the flying monkeys? They're really misunderstood creatures. But what did scare me was the movie The Wiz, the one with Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. And there's this creepy guy who like was a homeless guy, but he like controlled these trash cans. They're like killer trash cans. The effects are horrible. I went back and watched it, I was like, why did this scare me? But I literally could not stay in the same room when that scene was happening. You know, it didn't scare me. The Poppy Whorehouse. There's this picture book I'm sure you guys are all familiar with called Rainbow Fish. And it's about, you know, the fish that has a bunch of pretty rainbow scales that none of the other fish have. And he's like kind of like hoarding his scales, but then eventually someone's like, "Oh, you should really share your scales," and so he does, and everyone gets the equal amount of scales, and everyone lives happily ever after. If you're like a history student or an English student, you probably guessed by now that that's kind of like a metaphor for communism. My mom just like refused to believe it. No, they wouldn't put that in a children's book. Absolutely they would. Let me point you to my next example, which is Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. This is one that I've talked to a lot of people about, and they're like, "What's that book?" Which I'm surprised about, because that book is totally badass. She goes to see these rats who like have human intelligence, and it's all about, you know, like the benefits or dangers of like genetic engineering and stuff, and it's really cool. Do you have any stories about, you know, frightening books or movies that you watched as a kid that either should have been frightening and weren't, or were and now you're not scared of them anymore? Leave them down there. Evie, I will see you on Monday. I didn't make a video, so I'm not gonna punish you for not making a video. My iMovie has been completely whack lately. I just gave up on it on Monday. So I'll see you then. Bye!